Thank you all for being here. Appreciate joining us this afternoon. As the governor issued his executive order today, that triggered special session for us on Monday at 8 a.m. So we will be coming in to session at 8 a.m. on Monday. We're working through our floor leaders to try to come up with protocol on the entrances to the Capitol to make sure people are safe in the building. They'll still be available and open to press in the gallery. But we'll also have all the live streaming functions up. Hopefully many of you can remote in, but we're not going to keep the press out. We're working also on a floor management plan to try to make sure that we minimize contact between the senators and try to keep up with the spirit and the procedure recommended by CDC. The governor's health emergency requires us to come into special session to either affirm that health emergency and or to terminate that health emergency. I am supportive of the health emergency and believe the governor does need those expanded authorities during these extraordinary times. So we have worked with staff to try to minimize, have a bare minimum staffing level to make sure we don't have people up there that are not necessary to be up there to run session. There's a couple different options. Right now, we have to deal with the health emergency and either affirm or deny the governor's declaration of that. But then we also have to deal with the revenue shortfall. We anticipate the Board of Equalization meeting Monday and coming up with those final numbers, and then us trying to backfill those monies for fiscal year 20. So the current fiscal year we're in that ends June 30th. I think the governor's executive order this morning really kind of tailors the emergency declaration to a health crisis rather than natural disaster. We're used to in Oklahoma declaring emergencies, but this is a unique one. And the legislature back in 2003, post 9/11, came up with a mechanism to be able to allow the governor to make this declaration. And so this will just give the governor more flexibility and authority to coordinate the overall state response to the health crisis. As you all know, this has not been triggered or used before, so it's the first time we're all dealing with it. And I don't see anything in the reading of the declaration that causes me concern. I think it's well in line with the statewide response to this pandemic. And so we've been working with the Attorney General and the governor to make sure we follow the law when it comes to this health emergency and the Senate and the House's response. At this point, we don't anticipate committee meetings next week. Now, there are two options when it comes to dealing with the revenue shortfall. One is the JCAB model, which would require 4 days of session with bills already being second read. The other is much like we dealt with the Open Meetings Act, having some rule suspension to be able to try to fast track any filling in of the monies right now. We have not made a final determination on that, but we're still working on that. As far as floor management, we're going to try to have shifts of votes. We're going to make sure that every question gets asked, so you won't see us moving as quickly as we normally do on opening and closing votes and or motions where we have unanimous consent or anything like that. You'll see a lot more roll calls and a lot more deliberative approach to making sure that every member of the Senate has an opportunity to voice their opinion and or ask any questions they may see. I strongly encourage you and the media to watch it remotely if possible, just to make sure we keep our numbers down. But again, the gallery will be open if you need to be in there. We're going to ask everyone to observe social distancing protocol and go from there. So with that, Aaron, I'll open it up to any questions people may have.
Okay, if you have a question, you can use the chat or use the send me a text message, and I'll unmute you. All right, we're getting a couple in. Looks like Trace was the first to ask, so I'll unmute you. Go ahead, Trace.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem, for your alacrity. in responding to us. You might notice that's a vocab word on my whiteboard behind me. Uh, as the media, who are basically the only members of the public allowed in the building if we choose to do that, it sounds like we're going to be relied on, as much, if not more than ever, to help relay information about what the legislature is considering doing each day, what you guys are doing each day. With that in mind, has there been any discussion about starting each day with a media briefing so that we kind of can help the public know what to expect in this process? I don't know if that's a suggestion or a question or both, but.
So I appreciate your word of the day. I used to have one of those calendars on my desk and haven't used one in a while, so I appreciate that very much. As far as media briefings each day, that's not something that, I've always tried to be accessible to the press and have the Monday and Thursday availability. I am very open to doing that, but we had not contemplated it at this point. I'm very open to doing that to accommodate you, though.
It just might make it easier for us to explain what the bills are, that kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah. Aaron, new assignment.
Sorry, Aaron.
That's okay, Roger. We'd already been thinking about that in advance, is how much we want to get you as much information as possible so that you know exactly what's going to happen, descriptions of the bills, and things like that. But if we can do it ahead of time, we'll try our hardest to do that. And if not, something like this, maybe an email with just a written description, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're going to go to Dylan Richards. Dylan, you should be unmuted now. Go ahead.
Hey, Mr. Pro Tem, thank you. I was just curious how many days you're expecting to be in session right now, and by the end of next week, do you think you'll have all of the critical work, including the budget and that kind of thing, done? Or we have to come back and work on the budget?
So I'll take your second question first. No, we will not have the budget done next week. I do not believe that. We won't take up other policy beyond the health emergency, or I should say we don't anticipate taking up anything besides the health declaration and the budget shortfall. As far as priority policy bills to get to the finish line before sine die and the FY21 budget, that will not be complete next week. We will have to come in at some future time to deal with that. And unique to the Senate, there's around 70 executive noms that we will have to deal with as well before sine die.
Thank you.
No problem.
Hey, Pro Tem, I think I'm next for a question. So I'm curious, the state, or maybe the State Department of Health rather, has recently, obviously they're dealing with the COVID crisis, and recently they said they made a multi-million-dollar purchase of PPE from basically the open markets. They haven't been super clear on that. And then, obviously we've increased our testing capabilities in the state. And so I'm just kind of curious, where is this money coming from? Are you guys being kept in the loop on where the money is coming from? And is it just, current State Department of Health funds?
So the State Department of Health has a pretty healthy amount of money still in some of the revolving funds. So I anticipate, I don't know definitively that it comes from that. That's what I'm assuming. They haven't sought a supplemental or any other type of legislative remedy to come up with the money to do that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Sean Murphy, you're up next. I've unmuted you. Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, thanks. Speaking of the health department, obviously they've had rotating leadership. They've had layoffs that were later found out to be unnecessary. They've had budget problems. Do you have every confidence in that agency as it's operating now?
So every confidence is a very strong confidence. We are trust but verify is a very wise method of overseeing, and I take legislative oversight extremely seriously. We've got a team of legislators looking at what they're doing and making sure that we think it's the best approach. I applaud recent ratcheting it up of trying to make it be more aggressive, and so we're still looking at that. I don't have a definitive answer for you, but right now we're having constant communication with them and know what's going on.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, next we've got Janelle. You're unmuted, Janelle. Go ahead.
Thanks. I had actually two questions. The first is, how many days do you anticipate meeting next week? And then also, there is mounting pressure on the governor to take more aggressive steps to contain COVID, like shelter in place or even lockdowns. What do you think of that pressure? I know your cohorts in the Senate, the Democrats, have requested a shelter in place.
Thank you for the question, Janelle. I think that right now it's unknown if we're going to be in 1 day or 4 days next week. I think it's really either or. I don't think it's a question of is there something between there. If we can find some vehicle that is left over from 2019 that we can, that's closely enough related that we can insert language and suspend rules, we could potentially do it all on Monday, but that's just a potential. So I think we need to plan for and prepare for 4 days next week and hope and try to work toward 1 day to try to minimize the amount of time we're in the building next week and minimize exposure to each other. As far as ramping up, I think this health declaration the governor made today goes a long way to that end. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get even more aggressive.
Okay, Steve Metzer had he typed a question in the chat. I don't know if you can see that, Pro Tem, or Steve?
Yes, I can see it. If Steve wants to ask me, he can, but I can see his question.
Steve, you're unmuted, and we also got your question in the chat. So go
I
ahead.
think you may have partially already answered it, but you might just address what I typed out there.
Okay. So as far as the meeting, again, my answer is either 1 or 4 days is what I'm believing right now. As far as how long it might take to stabilize the budget, so that's a multifaceted question. The budget for fiscal year 20, I think, can be taken care of fairly swiftly, hopefully, given what the Board of Equalization may do on Monday. But anything that the Board of Equalization does on Monday has an effect not only on fiscal year 20, looking at the revenue failure there, any monies that we have to use to plug those holes will adversely impact our ability to look at the FY21 budget. So as far as the FY20, I think we can take care of it rather rapidly next week, hopefully. As far as stabilizing the budget on a going forward for the next fiscal year that begins July 1, that will be a little bit longer process.
All right, thanks.
Pro Tem Barbara also typed a question in the chat. Essentially, what are your thoughts or opinions on how long it'll take to put together a budget?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Barbara. I think that somewhat the same answer that I just gave Steve, that we're not sure how long it'll take to get the FY21. I will tell you that our subcommittee chairs, our appropriations chairs in both the House and Senate have been working extremely hard, really since the end of last session, of coming up with a budget for FY21. And they are working closer together than I've ever seen an appropriations chair from the House and Senate working together, and they're having tremendous progress. So I'm hopeful it will be rather quick. But as soon as you say that, there's going to be some snag in the road that we didn't anticipate.
We got a follow-up from Trace. Go ahead, Trace.
Yeah, thank you so much. Mr. Pro Tem, I was looking at one of the Title 63 statutes that was activated by the governor's health emergency declaration, and I won't read the whole thing, but it affords him the suspension of, quote, the provisions of any regulatory statute for prescribing procedures for conducting state business or the orders and rules of any state agency to the extent that it would impede dealing with the emergency. I guess my question is, have you had any thought, do you believe, do you think it would be a best practice for the governor's office to alert you or the public when such a law or rule is suspended? I don't see any reporting requirement for him to do that. So have you had any discussions about where the transparency will be on anything that's suspended to take action?
Yes, I do think it'd be best practice. And I think since this is the first time we've ever utilized this declaration, there's probably a good time to reevaluate it and see if we need to update anything within it on reporting requirements and or, the 8 a.m. requirement's going to be interesting because we're going to have to be in at 8 a.m. Monday and they're going to have to wait to deal with the budget later in that day. I think it was written in such a way that contemplated we'd be out of session if one of these were called. So there's a few things that I've taken notes on within that language, some of that you just read, and then other parts of it that I would like to update. But as far as best practices, absolutely. I think if it's necessary to suspend a regulatory statute or a rule, I think some requirement there. I've asked personally what the reason for this is and received the same thing he put out in his publicly available, but he put that to me before that went out publicly. I was appreciative of that because I was trying to figure out, me personally as a legislator, do I support this effort? And I was trying to figure out what he was trying to get at by declaring this. And I am convinced that it will be helpful in addressing COVID-19.
Thank you.
Pro Tem, we had a question from Dylan about if there are committee hearings, will they be live streamed, like the video of it, like the floor activity is?
Yes, absolutely. It will be live streamed. If you have any issues with that, reach out to Aaron Cooper to make sure that happens. But Aaron and our IT leader, Devin, have been working this entire time to make sure that our software and our equipment is up to snuff to be able to live stream everything appropriately, so that you shouldn't have any problems with that.
We appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Sean Ashley typed a question in. Do you plan to fully fill the FY20 budget hole, or will there be cuts to the current year's budget?
Thank you, Sean, for that question. I think that's yet to be determined. We've got to see exactly what size the hole is and compare that to our current savings. I think our druthers in the Oklahoma State Senate, and I'll only speak on behalf of the Oklahoma State Senate, are that we completely fill it to make sure services are still received by Oklahomans. But we've got to look at that final number that will come out by the Board of Equalization and make a determination based on our ability to draw down out of rainy day 3/8 if there's the revenue failure, and also if there's a governor's emergency, you can draw down a quarter. So we just got to make sure that's sufficient to cover any hole. And looking toward our budget negotiation for fiscal 21 that's still ongoing, and make sure we don't adversely impact that.
We had Sean Murphy typed in a question, Pro Tem. Do you anticipate passing the bill to change the requirements for the Commissioner of Health so that Gary Cox can remain in the position?
So that's still pending legislation with the title off, and we are still looking at that. That bill, and there was a bill on CLO. The CLO has had a vacancy now, so that bill is not as pressing. I'm talking to Gary Cox on a fairly regular basis, but there's two parts to his confirmation. One would be amending that law to allow the qualifications to be changed, but also the executive nom process of confirming, and both are pending in the Senate still.
It looks like that's all the questions on the chat. I don't have any text messages. We'll give another go around if anyone else has any questions. Now's your chance. It looks like that may be it for now. I'll give it to the Pro Tem for final thought.
Yeah, these are serious times, and we're taking it seriously in the Senate, making sure that people's health is protected, because we go back out into the communities and we want to make sure that we are helping flattening the curve because of this health order and because of the budget revenue failure. We will need to be in next week, but we will be taking it very seriously and staffing at an appropriate level that is low enough that we just don't have people up there unnecessarily. if we can help answer any questions between here and there, please don't hesitate to reach out to Aaron, and I'll reach out to you. But we're going to try to continue to do these. Hopefully you're finding these Zoom calls helpful. And I really appreciate your time today.